seems I'm all alone again. Does anybody care? This planet's empty. I see no signs of life. Please don't tell me that the human race did not survive. There are no people in the future. There are no people. There are no people in the future. No people at all. There are no people in the future. Where did all my people go? There are no people in the future. Let me try my people call. Where are all my people? Where are all my people? I guess I'll fly away now.
Hey, everybody, welcome. It is Friday, June 14th, 2024, and it has been a while since I've been sitting in this seat talking to you all. Welcome once again. This is Raging Chicken's Friday Politics Roundup. This is Kevin Mahoney, editor and founder of Raging Chicken. Each week we break down the good, the bad, and the ugly in state and national politics. You can support the show, become a patron for as little as $5 a month. Get on over to patreon.com/RFCpress for all the details. And if you can help out the show by checking out our YouTube channel if you're not there already, smash that subscribe button, like the stream for this show, and hit that notification bell so you know every time that we go live. If you're one of our awesome podcast listeners, make sure to leave us a 5-star review, whatever platform you listen on, and leave a comment to let folks know why you like the show. Little things like this help other people find the show. On today's show, got a bunch of stuff. We're going to run through things in the news. It's been a while, so catch you up what's been going on kind of my end of things. Love to hear from you, see what's happening in your neck of the woods. We're kind of in the thick of summer now. Heat waves spreading, hitting us here in the East Coast now this week. So I guess we're off and running. For more PA Progressive Talk, tune to the Rick Smith Show's live stream at 9 p.m. Eastern on his YouTube channel, Twitter, Facebook. Subscribe to his podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Check out thericksmithshow.com for the latest across all his platforms. You got to check out the Sisters of the Night Caucus podcast, the amazing PA women stirring the political cauldron behind his podcast, Rock the House. I didn't know where the bodies are buried. Make sure to follow them on Twitter at The Night Caucus. That's at The Night Caucus on Twitter. And subscribe to their podcast on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcast. And if you haven't heard The Signal, yep, it's that podcast from the Bucks County Beacon. The Signal is hosted by Beacon's editor-in-chief, Cyril Michaleko, and it's edited by yours truly. Twice a month, The Signals shine a light on the right-wing extremist currents streaming through Bucks County and beyond. Cyril invites guests to provide insight, analysis, and organizing solutions so we can steer the community towards calmer, saner, progressive routes. Check it out at thebuckscountybeacon.podbean.com. And we got a new show coming up for you next week, just so you know. I know folks might be saying, hey, don't you guys really drop a show kind of right at the beginning of the month, and what happened? And no worries. This is what happens when you're scheduling really cool authors and activists and stuff to come on for interviews. Cyril had to reschedule kind of an interview. Then we had some kind of, it's really, scheduling snafus right across the board, trying to find time to kind of make all this stuff work. So, but things are, it's in the bucket, and editing is proceeding. So look for a great new show coming out next week. I don't want to spoil it, so I'll let you know who it is, so you'll find that out soon enough. And for all you gamers out there, The Game-In is a Quakertown-based black family-owned gaming store. Friends of the show, they've got everything for retro N64s, the latest consoles, video games for all platforms, collectibles, action figures, Funko Pops, walls of Funko Pops. And look, it's the end of the school season. Kids are out, right? Bring your report cards in. Kids get discounts where you can show them all the A's that your kids got. Got a question about a game, look for something hard to get, they've got you covered. Check them out on their Facebook page and follow them on Twitter at The Game-In. That's with 2 N's, at The Game-In on Twitter. You can shoot them a message, drop them an email to at thegamenpa@gmail.com. And if you're in the Kutztown area, you got to check out the Heart and Hearth Deli and Smokehouse, located at 466 West Main Street, kitty corner to the Kutztown University campus. Heart and Hearth is an American bistro featuring barbecue and French-inspired fare, all with locally sourced and organic ingredients. Special shout out also goes to Jonathan Mann, who wrote our intro song, There Are No People in the Future. Check out all his great stuff on his YouTube page and follow him on Twitter at Song of Dayman. That's at Song of Dayman on Twitter. And look, we want a progressive future. We need progressive media. Support Pulled No Punches, homegrown progressive media today by becoming a patron of Raging Chicken for as little as $5 a month. Head on over to patreon.com/rcpress. We're here for the fight, and we need you. Become a patron for the price of a good beer once a month. Help keep the media in the movement, and the movement in the media. Become a patron for as little as $5 a month by going to patreon.com/rcpress today. Well, welcome everybody. Like I said, it has been a minute, or I don't know, several hundred minutes since I've been here. Even this morning, my computer was not cooperating. It was going through multiple updates, and it just kept on going and going and going. But finally, hopefully, we're here. Then to top all matters off, just as we kind of get ready to roll, as I bring up my YouTube stream page, for whatever reason, the comments section inside the YouTube studio, for those of you who work in YouTube studio at all, just comment sections was not connecting at all, was not showing up, and then it was just a weird situation. Even after I went live, it looked like the show was not going live right. So if there's anybody listening right now can just give me a shout out, that'd be so awesome, just to make sure that you all are hearing me and that I'm not just sitting here talking to myself and nothing is actually happening. So we shall see. Best I can tell, things are up and running, things are going well. Yeah, so it has been a minute, as I said, and that's primarily because I've been sick. I've been sick for like nearly 2 weeks. I think the last show I did, actually, I was not feeling well. Felt more like allergies or something. I wasn't quite sure. But started to feel a little bit better, and we had this birthday party planned for my mom. She just turned 80 this year. She's a leap year kid, and but when we were going to do a party for her, we said, well, we'll do it wherever other people can come. So it was this big party and stuff. And sure enough, half of us got sick in the house. I was feeling well enough to be able to go, and but didn't feel great. It was a fantastic weekend, family scene, all that kind of stuff. And then I came back, it just seemed to get kind of worse and worse. And, that was way back on June 1st. And it got repeatedly worse, and to the point where everyone in our house seemed to have it. My son actually got strep too as well on top of it. None of us got it. So we thought, oh, is that what is going on? No. And best that the doctors could tell is just some kind of, respiratory virus, but it's been hanging on. I mean, now you probably still hear it in my voice a little bit today, but I've still even last night, like just when you lay down to go to sleep, start coughing like crazy, and everyone in our family's got it. But this week, I should say yesterday was like the first day that I really felt I could kind of get out and do some stuff in the garden and things like this, but it's been really bumming me out. And it's also contributed to, a really, it just got me in a funk. I'll tell you that, sitting there and, being sick. The weather has been great, right? It's been sunny, but it's, been nice out, not too hot. I love to do stuff in the yard. I loved kind of like planting stuff and all this kind of thing. And I wasn't able to do it until like just a couple of days ago. And even after that, I guess it wasn't yesterday. I guess it was Wednesday. Wednesday I did a bunch of stuff, and then it was like, man, my allergies kicked in, and it's just been weird. So thank you for the notes that people have sent, the emails, just kind of say, hey, what's happening? What's going on? Just want to let you know that we're kind of back and running. Oops, sorry about that. Just want to make sure it looks like we're running. Okay, I just had to test the stream there for a second to make sure it looks like it's going live. Oh, but what a beginning of this summer. I mean, so God, the last we talked, I can't even remember if the last time that we had this show, if we had already seen the convictions come down from Trump. 34 felony convictions, unanimous jury decision, convicting Trump. But I think I even said on the show before, it's like, I don't think it's going to matter to his overall campaign. I mean, I think if anything, he's going to utilize it, and it's going to be, it's just going to be part of his campaign. and we'll see how he's going to lean into it. And you know, I happened to be listening to I was walking my dog this morning. I was listening to Chris Hayes's show from last night, just on the podcast version, just to try to kind of, you know, catch up to what's been going on. And you know, they had Michelle Goldberg was on there, and she was interviewed, and basically I had a really good kind of perspective on this, is that, you know, look, they're really leaning into, like, you know, the criminal, you know, kind of mafia, mob boss kind of vibe, I think is what she said. And I thought that was a good way to describe it, because, you know, you know, it's always got to be a little cautious in terms of, like, you know, how you're describing what the intentions of any one particular group is. I mean, you've heard me say, you know, God, this goes back to 2016 when Trump was running. It's like, you know, I remember when Sean Kitchen used to be on the show, and he and I used to do the Friday Politics Roundup. We used to go back and forth on this, right? And I used to say, look, the only thing you need to know about, you know, Trump's campaign is that he's running it like a mob boss. And it's like, you know, I grew up in you know, a kind of, you know, a mob town in Utica, New York, right? A former mob town. But that you learn that kind of ethic, right? It's kind of like embedded in the culture. And I don't necessarily mean that like everybody's in the mob, but you kind of understand what certain things mean and all that, and how people act. And because, you know, that mob mentality, right? You don't necessarily have to be in an actual crime syndicate to be acting out of this mob mentality, right? It has to do with this kind of transactional type of politics, if you will, about, you know, authoritarianism at its core, right? Very patriarchal, and, you know, about whether you're in favor or outside of favor or out of favor. You know, it's like that, you know, and it's funny. I just so happens, you know, my wife and I last night, we watched, you know, like, this is kind of like, you know, whatever, the mindless, let's like numb and have fun kind of show. I watched a episode of Bridgerton last night, and for any of you who are fans of it, I don't want to spoil it to you, but there's this one line where one character is basically talking to another character and said something along the lines of, like, look, if you weren't so preoccupied with your status, maybe you could do something other than what you're doing, right? And it just occurred to me as I was thinking about that whole kind of aristocratic, like formal mode of being, right? You know, where, and I don't mean like feudal societies, I mean the aristocracy, like the quote unquote, like high society, and the way that whole dynamic works culturally, right? About, you know, whether you're in favor with the queen or your family's name and reputation and all this stuff. It's really just a cleaned up version of this kind of mob kind of mentality. You know, I mean, it was so I was thinking about that. It's like, oh, that's interesting. I mean, it's obviously they're not going and killing people, right? I mean, the big difference is it doesn't rest upon overt direct acts of violence. Of course, all its violence are off in the colonies, right? You know, and that's kind of where how that happens, right? The violence is kind of removed from the immediacy of the high society, right? But it's happening kind of also on in the colonies and the territories and the streets, that kind of stuff. So, but anyways, put that aside. So I was just thinking a lot about that. And then I was also thinking a lot about, well, there's a bigger conversation here that I don't think I'm going to have today, but it's like, I've been thinking a lot about democracy, and I've been thinking a lot about rule and how long patterns of the ruled and the rulers, right? And the dynamics between the ruled and the ruled. The rulers and the ruled. Right. And it's interesting how that happens in the move from an aristocracy to a democracy, or a republic, if you want to say that. And I was just thinking a lot about how that works ideologically, how that you get people to buy in a different system. You know, in a sense, it's like I've been thinking a lot about hegemony, right? But in particular, in the ways that it happens, because I don't remember who it was that I was reading, or maybe I heard an interview with someone. They were talking about the ways that how would I put it? They say America is both, at the same time, it's an experiment, an ongoing experiment in democracy, and an ongoing experiment in authoritarianism and tyranny, right? And they're happening at the same time, and they always have been happening at the same time, right? I mean, it's the, on the one hand, the expansive mode of democracy, right, where it's about including, and it's about including more people, getting more people to franchise, more people to participate, right? It's to have a the rulers, right, if you will, right, the representatives, right, the Congress should represent the people as they are, right? We should represent everybody. They should look like everybody, right? Variety of backgrounds, all that kind of stuff. That rich notion, that deep democracy, right? That's on the one side. But on the other side is the kind of white supremacist, patriarchal, genocidal, authoritarian project. Christian nationalist. And that's been through in our history at the same time. Right? And I think that, for the longest time, I've been thinking a lot about this, because it's, I don't know, I guess the past several years, well, not even the past several years, but really the past year and a half or so, I've personally, right, just been in just a really, kind of a funky space, let's put it that way. And I think, there's a bunch of, reasons personally for that, and my work and my job and all this other kind of stuff that's going on there. And, but really it's like COVID and Trump and the rise of these kind of like neo-fascists and all this stuff. And then to have it come to a head in my own school district, right? So I think that's the first time, and again, I recognize the privilege in what I'm about to say, right? But I think that's the first time that it's come knocking at my door that closely, right? Where it's been, you're assaulting my kids with this stuff, I mean, and it's like, and there's no rest, there's no space from that, right? And and I think a lot of the world experiences life like that, but anyway, so I think that, and I maybe not exactly the first time. I might, think about growing up pretty damn poor, and that was another time. But it just felt exhausting, right, in the end of it. And I just been thinking a lot about, the patterns of kind of what we want and who the we is really. Because I of the, I don't know, I think I said this on the show once, probably like last year, a couple years ago or something, but I feel like part of, as I've learned more about the world, met more people, and kind of had more experiences in the world and all this other kind of stuff, as I get older, I think that it's been an ongoing project of kind of dismantling my own not nostalgia is the wrong word. It's not nostalgia, but kind of ideological frameworks or something like that. But I hate sounding like some freaking textbook. It's more like my assumptions, and kind of like my core baseline of kind of assumptions about, about the United States, about democracy, about all this other kinds of stuff. And yes, that means it's become more complicated, right? But I've also thought a lot about, why that is, and what the perfect example of this is, you see what's happening with the Supreme Court, right? What's happening with the Supreme Court, over the last 10 years, right? The Supreme Court has been, the vehicle for an assault on democracy, on the rights of women, the right to vote, the right. I mean, you go right down the line. Right, Supreme Court has led the charge on the assaults on democracy. When I was coming up, right, I was, coming up in the 70s and 80s and stuff. Is that was in the aftermath of the civil rights movement, and one of the most significant Supreme Courts in the history of the United States that expanded democracy, expanded rights. Right, so our history books, when we're learning the history of the Supreme Court were the heroes, right? The justices were the heroes. They're the ones who called for an end of segregation. They were the ones who kind of, granted the rights to vote. They were the ones who, integrated schools. They were the, like the decisions would come through there. They were the ones who legalized abortions, right? So you grow up in that context, right, and learning about the Supreme Court, and learning the Supreme Court was a good thing, right? The Supreme Court were the champions, right? And I remember, just in casual conversations with people, not even political people, but that's the way it would, they would talk about the Supreme Court. Supreme Court was the place that would right the wrongs, right? And so, in our textbooks, we say the Supreme Court, the reason why they're appointed for life is because they wanted to be above politics so that they could kind of judge things effectively and against like the partisanship, right? It was like this Platonic notion of, the philosopher king, so to speak. They could impartially judge this stuff and for their fairness, right? And that notion, right, of that, the blind justice and stuff. And yes, of course, there, could point to times when they made bad decisions and all that kind of stuff. But for the most part, that period of time, there was a lot of good that happened. And that was like one of those assumptions that I just carried with me unknowingly for a long, long time in my life, And then I remember like years ago, what was the book? Ian Millhiser was on the Rick Smith show, right? And he was talking about his book. Oh God, what is the name of that book? I'm going to pull it up now. What were his books? Ian Millhiser. Injustices. It's called, yep, Injustices. And so, I mean, you could pick it up used for like, $7 or something like this, right? But in Injustices, it came out in 2015, and one of the things, let me read this. This is just from the book description. So it says, few American institutions have inflicted greater suffering on ordinary people than the Supreme Court of the United States. Since its inceptions, the justices of the Supreme Court have shaped a nation where children toiled in coal mines, where Americans could be forced into camps because of their race, and where a woman could be sterilized against her will by state law. The court was the midwife of Jim Crow, the right hand of Union busters, and the dead hand of the Confederacy. Nor is the modern court a vast improvement with its incursions on voting rights and its willingness to place elections for sale. In this powerful indictment of a venerated institution, Ian Millhiser tells the history of the Supreme Court through the eyes of the everyday people who have suffered the most from it. America ratified 3 constitutional amendments to provide equal rights to freed slaves, but the justice spends 30 years largely dismantling these amendments, and it goes on. What he says in that interview and what he says in the book, it's a great book, I would highly recommend it, Injustices by Ian Millhiser, is that he says that he recognized that period, just as I described, like me coming up and looking to the Supreme Court as the heroes. That was the aberration. And he said, to some degree, conservatives are right in basically saying we need, to say the Supreme Court had, the Supreme Court, when they, not that they're right, the Supreme Court, they say we need to get back to the way Supreme Court used to be, right? And the reason they can say that, and it means something historically, is because the Supreme Court used to be the vehicle for the richest, whitest, malest people out there, right? They were the protectors of the elites, right? They were the ones who ensured that democracy could not march forward. Anytime that there were laws that were passed that would made things better for people, they would shoot them down. And that's the vast majority of the history of the Supreme Court, according to Millhiser in his well-researched book. And so that guy, it kind of did this thing to my brain, right? I mean, it kind of did the thing to my brain, and it made me realize, first of all, that what I had been assuming unconsciously about the Supreme Court for a long time in my life was really a warped vision of what the Supreme Court was, right? I mean, just because of when I was born in history, right? And it was also true that the Democratic Party during that time was championing the Supreme Court, right? And had seen, and in some ways, this is just one of these notions that I have about this stuff, but it makes me think that because the Supreme Court was carrying out parts of the agenda of, say, the grassroots of the Democratic Party. So in other words, well, I should even say that because at the time, the grassroots of the Democratic Party, half of the Democratic Party were the racists who wanted to keep, segregation in place, right? The Southern Democrats were, the racists, right? They were the bad people, right? But something happened in that move forward with a group of politicians, particularly the baby boomers who kind of came of age in the 60s and 70s. They saw the Supreme Court basically making rulings that matched their politics and their morals. And I wonder to what degree that had an impact upon how that generation learned to do politics and the assumptions that they made about institutions. Right, because if anything is marked by this moment, is like, the right wing in this country, they particularly the political right wing, they know how to do politics, like at the machine level. Right, they're organized around doing like door knocking, grassroots politics, pushing the agenda, controlling the media. I mean, right across the board, it is pretty an amazing machine. And the leaders of the Democratic Party, on the other hand, right? I don't mean all Democrats here, but I mean the leaders of the Democratic Party who have guided the Democrats since like the 90s. For the long, I remember right up until Roe, or even before then, right? The what do you call it? The Citizens United decision. There were assumptions that the court will take care of this. The court could never allow this to go forward. They would never do this. That they respect the law. That's what they do. And so I think that, to a certain degree, leaders in the Democratic Party that came out of that baby boomers generation assumed that the Supreme Court were the guardrails, right? That the Democratic Party and politics was not the guardrails. Like, you didn't need to go out and organize. You need to make arguments in the affirmative for your case because the Supreme Court would stop the bad stuff. And we've seen, this generation of people coming up, like my kids' age, even older than them, have not grown up with that version of the Supreme Court. They've grown up with a version of the Supreme Court that has been stripping away their rights. So that's interesting to me. It's like, to what degree did that go on? Because, I remember, look, I think everybody went through, something during the Trump administration when you say, oh, he can't do that. That's going to sink his campaign because of what he said, like in the Access Hollywood tapes. Or that's going to sink his campaign because of this. And we found that again and again and again. Nope, it didn't work. And then once Trump was elected, he got in there and basically ran roughshod over the way things are done. And I think for so many of us, we thought that he was breaking the law. And it turns out there were laws there. They were guidelines. They were norms. It was pushing the limits of the law by running roughshod over like I don't know, behavioral norms, really. And the show, that if you didn't really care about being shamed, then you could do all sorts of stuff. Right? That's what this generation is growing up with. Now, having said that, right? I mean, we just saw this, excuse me, yesterday. The U.S. Supreme Court unanimously upheld access to the abortion pill, mifepristone, right, which is phenomenal. And that case was so important for a couple reasons, right? To read you from this part from The Guardian, it also says the FDA still has the power to give expanded access to mifepristone in major victory abortion rights supporters. Just read a little bit from this. The availability of the common abortion pill will remain unchanged. The United States Supreme Court ruled on Thursday in a unanimous 9-0 decision, handing a major victory to abortion rights supporters who feared that the court overturned Roe v. Wade just 2 years ago would further hack away at access to the procedure. The case, a consolidation of Food and Drug Administration versus Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine and Danco Laboratories LLC versus Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine, dealt with FDA's ability to regulate mifepristone, one of 2 drugs typically used in medication abortions, which now make up more than 60% of all U.S. abortions and have become a major target of anti-abortion activists. A coalition of abortion opponents had tried to persuade the Supreme Court to roll back a series of moves by the FDA to expand access to the drug, such as allowing abortion providers to mail mifepristone to patients, a request that the justices met with skepticism in the case's March arguments. The abortion opponents claimed that if the FDA's current regulations of mifepristone were allowed to remain, anti-abortion doctors would suffer harm if they have to treat women who experience complications from mifepristone. But in Thursday's majority opinion, Justice Brett Kavanaugh, of all people, rejected that argument, ruling that the anti-abortion activists did not prove that they had a legal right or standing to bring the case in the first place. All right, so it's a unanimous ruling. Now, there's a bunch of stuff about this, and I'm sure that if you're listening to this podcast, you're already familiar with a lot of these arguments. But a bunch of the issues around this case is that, notice that the main issue that they were, why they had a majority opinion was because they found that the plaintiffs did not have standing. In other words, you don't have the standing to bring the suit because you're not having harm, right? That it was a super stretch in order to kind of say that they were causing harm. Now, there's a couple things about this too as well. So one, let's say number one, that's huge, right? That is enormous, because basically this has been the only access to abortion that kind of increasingly numbers of women across the country, like nearly half the states, don't have access to the abortion in any meaningful way. So this is one of the few ways of making sure that you can order the stuff from out of state and then have this. There's still all sorts of increasing risks involved, because if you're not with a doctor with it, that if something goes, if something were to go wrong, there's so were to go wrong, you weren't sure or whatever it might be, then, you're not in the pipeline already. You got to go to the doctor after that, but whatever. But still, this is a huge victory. But the big but, right? The case was not decided ultimately on the merits of the case. And in other words, can the doctors do this, right? Or does the FDA have the right to regulate these things, right? It was about the standing of the people who are bringing the case. Why does that matter? Well, there's a couple other cases that are going through, and this has kind of been the right wing's assault on the quote unquote administrative state. Right, there's the famous case. If you ever listen to the Majority Report has talked about the Chevron doctrine, for example, for like a decade, right? And the Chevron doctrine was basically the doctrine which basically led to, I'm not going to go through all the details of it, but basically the result of that case was the Supreme Court affirming that regulatory agencies, in that case the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA had the right to regulate Chevron, right? Had the right to basically say, there are these kind of emissions that cause health problems that you can't do, right? I'm being so general about this, but ultimately the result of it was saying that yes, administrative bodies like the EPA, in this case of the mifepristone case, the FDA, they have the right to regulate, their purview of expertise, right? And the idea was this, right? So, for example, if and it had big implications, like for like the Clean Water Act, for example, right? Like, so say for example, what the conservatives want to do is to say that, okay, look, the EPA can regulate, let's say, like PFAS, right? We've had these PFAS chemicals that have been leaching into the water, causing all sorts of cancer to people and all sorts of health problems because of this, this foam that they would use on military bases to spray down aircrafts and things. So, and that chemical, PFAS, has caused cancer, so now it can be regulated. Right? What the conservatives say that every time that there is a chemical to be regulated, Congress has to pass a law directing the EPA to regulate that chemical. Right? Here's the problem with that. I don't know if you've been paying attention at all, but how long does it take Congress to pass anything? Right? But let's just say, okay, it takes Congress, whatever, 9 months. Let's say it's a speedy one. 9 months, PFAS, we see this, oh, we've recognized this chemical here. First, so they've had hearings, so they have to hold hearings. Because the vast majority of senators are not experts. They're not chemists, right? They're not, people that are familiar with the background and the research of water and all this stuff. So they're going to have to hold hearings to basically understand what's going on here, understand what the chemical is, learn what the impacts are, and then think about how are they going to best regulate that, write a regulation for that particular chemical, and then pass a law that will go in effect maybe, in a year. So that takes a year process, right? So then the EPA can regulate it. But let's say, for example, the experts at the EPA notice that, hey, wait a minute, in that same water, right? We've come across several other chemicals, right, that are also causing health problems. We want to ban those chemicals, right? What the conservatives want to say is like, no, the EPA does not have the right to do that. For the EPA to regulate those new chemicals that they recognize as dangerous, they got to go back and hold hearings and go there and get a new law for each one of those chemicals. Right? That's a crazy way to deal with it. Right? The idea in that the Chevron doctrine was that places like the EPA have broad authority to regulate environmental hazards. Right? And why do they have that broad authority? Because they're the experts, right? They're the ones who have the ability to who are the scientists, right? Who test all the water, have all the expertise in all the impacts of chemicals and all this other stuff. Yes, we could talk about all the problems that have happened with the EPA before, but that, broadly speaking, that's the idea, right? So the EPA can recognize that there's a new environmental hazard and pass a new regulation, right, that will ban that substances, right? And that's just been normal. Like, that's been part of law. That's been part of the way things do. Well, they've been going after this one after the other. There's several cases this year that are going to do this. This case had that embedded in it, right? Which was one of the issues that was being pushed in this case on mifepristone, right? Was to basically say the Food and the Drug Administration do not have the authority to do this. They do not have the authority to basically say this drug is healthy. This drug should be available over the counter, or this drug should be available by mail because it is that safe. And the folks that were bringing this suit wanted to go after that. So at the one hand, it was about further controlling women's bodies, people who can have children. It was about further entrenching a patriarchal rule, right? So it was going to do that. Secondly, it was about putting a muzzle, or really a harness, or shackles even, on an agency designed to make sure that food and drugs are safe. right? So there was a pathway in this ruling to both further suppress women in this country and make sure that corporations had free rule to put whatever the hell they wanted out on the market without fear of regulation from the FDA. Right? It's freaking crazy. So this case really was a punt on those major issues. The punt was basically enabled because the people who brought the suit are just hacks, right? The people who brought this suit are just looking for cases that they can bring to the Supreme Court to try to do those two things we just talked about. To go further after women's access to abortion, to increase the control of women by men and religion, and to roll back regulatory bodies and shackle them. It could have done all that in one fell swoop, but because these people just didn't really have standing, the court could say unanimously, you guys didn't really have the right to bring this case because you really don't have standing, so we're not going to even talk about those issues that are there. That's dodging a bullet. But if you ask me, the bullet that's being dodged has everything to do with the election. It has nothing to, and this goes back to what my opening about the Supreme Court was all about, right? But how right now it is the most like politicized body that I mean, politicized I've ever seen that body. And they're ready, right? They're not dumb enough or reckless enough quite yet, most of them, to just basically say, whatever, that we're going to do whatever the hell we want, regardless of, screw the law. No, they're trying to kind of pick the right cases. In this case, I think a lot of them recognize that if this ban went through and these were conservative justices, 3 of which were appointed by Trump, and then not only did they overturn Roe v. Wade, but they're going to ban mifepristone. In that case, that would be going into the election, which would, sink Donald Trump's possibilities of being elected. I think this is a case that was decided more about politics than anything else. So yes, a win, right? But it's a small win, right? It's a small W win. It's still a win. Thank God it's got real impacts on real people's lives, right? The fact that this didn't get banned, that they just refused to hear this case, or said no, that mifepristone should be available. Thank goodness for that. And I think another reason why they had to do something is because, I don't know if you've been following this too as well, but turns out that Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito are also been in the hot seat quite a bit. Clarence Thomas, right? Because if you recall, because ProPublica did some reporting that saw that, hey, Clarence Thomas seems to be taking a ton of money from really rich people. How about that? Oh, it seems to be the case. Well, yes, he seems to be taking some money. And there were, what's that dude? Harlan Crow, that's the guy's name. From Harlan Crow, right? This like kind of huge, like billionaire GOP donor. And he's been just handing out luxury trips to Clarence Thomas and paying for this whole stuff. And ProPublica had this investigation of it and broke that all open. And the result of that was that, what's his face? Clarence Thomas had to declare a whole bunch more than he had declared. And turns out that he hadn't declared millions of dollars worth of gifts that he's received from Harlan Crow. And then because of that explanation, of that kind of like investigation, and because it put enough pressure upon the court to basically say, well, we need to be disclosing these things. And suddenly Samuel Alito, he has to disclose some of the stuff that he got from, guess who? Harlan Crow. So now you're seeing that kind of degree of corruption going on, right? Not to mention like the political scandal that's going on because of, Samuel Alito flying, the U.S. flag, or his wife supposedly, just he and his wife flying the flag upside down. Other kind of right-wing flags have been flying after the insurrection, right? Kind of supposedly in support of Donald Trump. That's been had a whole lot of pressure. So I think the court, this is a perfect example of where the court is responding to things in the world that have nothing to do with the law, right? And I say that because this court has showed itself to basically disregard the law when it sees fit in order to write new laws that fits its Christian nationalist, fundamentalist, white supremacist vision of the world, right? So there you have it. So now they're here now they're worried about their jobs. Now they're worried about things that are personal. Now they're worried about kind of like, I don't know, did they violate some kind of laws? Right? Is this going to force more restrictions? So this is, I think, a way of them kind of, we're going to let a little air out of the tire here. There's a little much pressure here. We're just going to kind of like take some of that pressure off before the election. We shall see. What else? There's some other things I wanted to talk about today. I don't know. There was something else. There's something else I wanted to go. But having said that, so it's funny. I hadn't started out thinking I was going to spend so much time in the Supreme Court this morning, but here I am. But it's really big. Oh, I know. That was the other Supreme Court thing. This is actually what got me focused on it the first thing this morning. So we're just going to talk about a bunch of other things. But then at the same time that case just came down, what did they just post today? They said the ban on bump stocks is illegal, right? So this came today. Supreme Court ruled today that the federal ban on bump stocks, is from NBC News, federal ban on bump stocks, gun accessories that allow semi-automatic rifles to fire more quickly, is unlawful. In a 6-3 ruling on ideological lines, the court's conservatives in majority, the court held that an almost 100-year-old law aimed at banning machine guns cannot legitimately be interpreted to include bump stocks. Writing for the majority, Clarence Thomas said that firearm equipped with accessory does not meet the definition of machine gun under a federal law. Right? The idea, if you remember what a bump stock does, right? It just basically automatically pulls the trigger for you. It's an accessory that gets put on the stock, and it's a way to get around the semi-automatic things, right? Because you can't have automatic weapons that are illegal, right? Semi-automatic ones that fire 3 at a time, right? So you're thinking about every time your finger can pull the trigger, you can fire another round. The bump stock, what it does is uses the recoil of the of the gun, right? Of the weapon, uses the recoil basically to pull the trigger again. So it basically operates like a automatic weapon, right? We saw that in kind of many of the mass shootings that were there. But this is the Supreme Court kind of allying itself with the NRA and the gun industry, right? Once again. So we lots of stuff coming down. So there. The other thing I guess that has, I guess we're gonna have to come back to another time, right? To get really back into, I need to shift my focus a little bit too, as well, in my brain too. There's so much going on with in Gaza, right? We saw now that Israel has been held in violation of kind of international law, as has Hamas, right? In terms of war crimes. And there's increasing international pressure upon the Israeli government because of the really full-on ethnic cleansing that it's participating in. 37,000+ people dead, most kids, young folks, women, right? So and that's been that just, I don't know about you, but that feels like it's out of control. I mean, it's just what we're seeing the Israeli government do in Gaza is just absolutely out of control. And the Biden administration has been not good, to say the least, on how it's been responding to what's happening in Gaza. Is that, I mean, how long do they expect to be able to carry out this idea that, to use like, we're being tough on Israel, we're saying things, and then Israel just basically goes like this, the Israeli government goes like this, to Biden, and just does whatever the hell it wants anyways. I mean, people are not dumb, right? They know that what Biden says is actually not, he's just talking out his ass. He's not going to do anything significant when it comes to Israel because they're too afraid of the Israeli lobby. So we shall see. We're going to come back to that. Anyways, I'm going to keep it kind of relatively at that today, because I can already feel my throat starting to kind of tense up again, but it's crazy. I do have a couple things I wanted to just mention, right? Because that, we used to do this segment on the show called we had different names for it. It was Last Calls, and the third segment is like basically kind of like fun stuff at the end of the show. And I think it's, what is it today, 14th? Yes, Sunday is the return of the Rings of Power. Yes, that's right. I cannot wait. So Lord of the Rings is coming back. I shouldn't say Lord of the Rings because it's not Lord of the Rings. But I'm very, very excited for it. I don't know if you've seen the trailer for it already, but it's just like, it's really cool. And season 2 of the Rings of Power will be launching on Sunday night. So maybe next week we'll come back. We'll talk a little about Rings of Power, and give us a little something to be kind of happy about. All right, everybody, that's going to do it for me today. I just want to make sure I kind of got in here today, and thanked everybody for again sending well wishes and questions, like make sure everything's okay and wonder what's going on. And it's just I've been sick, and look, and I'm sorry that I haven't been posting anything to social media about what's been going on, but frankly, again, this is again, I'll unpack this as the weeks go on, but I'm finding social media has been more depressing to me lately than it has in a long, long time. Just frustrating as all hell. But at the same time, it's like I find myself really missing my community, right? That like on social media. So I miss that. But anyways, I'm going to do some more digging in the garden maybe later today if we don't get too much of the thunderstorms. Hope everybody stays cool, because there is looks like a heat dome is potentially going to settle in over the Northeast. We'll see where exactly it settles in. Maybe it's going to happen over New York City. Maybe it's in kind of near areas. We shall see. We do. All right, everybody, that's going to do it for me today. This is Kevin Mahoney, editor and founder of Raging Chicken. I wish you all a wonderful weekend, and look forward to be kind of back in this seat if I can clear out all the rest of what's ever in my lungs, All right, everybody, have a good weekend, and thanks for all tuning in. Remember, heading over to patreon.com/rcpress for all the details on how to help support the show, or just follow the show. It'd be fantastic. All right, everybody. See ya.
I guess I'll fly away now.